Welcome back, everybody. I'm glad you've tuned in. As we come to these final few sessions of Psalm 46, I wanted to recap a little bit about this foundation that the psalmist has been building, because it's going to be important as we move forward in looking at what it means to be still and know that God is God. So we've talked about God as our fortress. We've talked about God as our comfort, that God is our dwelling, that God is our defender, and ultimately God is our sovereign. And those are the 5 pillars that hold up the foundation that we're going to stand upon and to be still and to know that God is God. And so grab your Bibles. I hope you're excited, and let's get started. Welcome back, everybody. Glad you tuned in. Again, my name's Jeff. I'm the Associate Pastor at Chestnut Grove. And if you would, take your Bibles and open up to Psalm 46 as we continue our journey through this chapter. And again, what we've been unpacking this time is the theme of be still. And the journey that we've been taking is how can we get to the point of being still and knowing that God is God? Now, we've already talked about and kind of laid the foundation about God as our fortress. He's our comfort. He's our dwelling. He's our deliverer. And He is our sovereign. Now, with this foundation, we're going to come to verse number 10 and see everything culminate in the command to be still and know that God is God. So if you would take your Bibles and turn to Psalm 46, and we'll begin reading the entire thing, and then today we're going to focus in on verse number 10. So verse number 1 begins, says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling, Selah. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage and the kingdoms totter. He utters His voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress, Selah. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how He has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress, Selah. And so in verse 10, again, we have this famous saying, be still and know that I am God. We see that it has a 2-part command. The first one is to be still, of course, and the other is to know. Now, what does it mean to be still? Now, the idea that the psalmist wants us to understand and grasp is the idea of just coming before God in awe and wonder. And in essence, in a spirit of praise. Why? Based on our knowledge of what He's done in the past, based on the knowledge of His promises for the now, and also the promises to come, we take this knowledge and this experience that we've had with Him, and we put it to our faith, and we just worship Him, knowing that ultimately He is in charge of everything, He is allowing everything, and we can steadfastly, with perseverance and faith, continue to live our life for His glory, not our own glory, pointing others to Him. And we do that by being still first and foremost. Now, there's a whole lot of things that kind of play into account with this idea of being still, and we can see it throughout the life of God's people through the Old Testament. It's not easy. We can't, the idea behind be still, we can't just sum up in a couple sentences, because we have to understand the vast wealth of wisdom that the psalmist is bringing to the table. And in essence, that's the history of the children of God and their interaction with God. We've seen times of faithfulness. We've seen times of rebellion. We've even seen times of grumbling. And this idea of being still before God, again, based off of this 5-pillar foundation that the psalmist has already built, this idea of being still before God encompasses all of that. Every aspect of my life should be still before our holy God Creator, who is sovereign, who is in control, who has immensely blessed me with grace and mercy and salvation through Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, when He was crushed on the cross for my sin, taking my death and giving me life. And in the face of all of that, my call is to be still. So what does it look like practically to be still before God? Well, I've got a big old long list. So let's kind of work through this and kind of get an understanding of what the psalmist is trying to get us to understand. So it's to sit down and wait with patience. All right. Again, thinking back on the children of Israel, thinking back on your own life, thinking back on the life of those around you, how you've seen people respond, how you've seen people react to their situations. And in essence, it's a gospel issue in their life, how we respond to things. But the first and foremost, it's this idea of just sitting down and waiting with patience. We adore him who gives us grace. So again, every situation we go into, we should have an idea of God's grace that has been poured out upon us. And you might say, well, how does God's grace being poured out upon me through Christ have anything to do with this aspect of my life over here? Well, it does, because everything that we go through is for the glory of God. Everything, how we respond, not just when we're at church, not when we're able to put on a show, but how I respond in the heat of a moment, in the heat of pressure, of being tested, of having something horrible take place. How I respond is a gospel issue in my life, because if I am still before God, first and foremost, I know that I deserve hell for my sin. I am a wretched, wretched person. Even in my redeemed state, there's times when I say, how is it that God could love me? But that's his grace. And that positions me in a state of humbleness in regards to everything that takes place around me. And so when life happens to me, I come back to this foundation of my salvation. You know what? I don't deserve anything from God, but yet he's given it to me. And he's called me to glorify him. And so that is, again, another foundation that I stand upon to live for his glory. And so it's also this idea of being still is an express of praise through silence. I worship when I can't utter a word. You know, we know in the New Testament, there's a passage that's actually taken out of context by some groups that says, when I can't utter a word, the Spirit is interceding with me. And think about it. When you come to a place in your life and something has transpired and you're just sitting and you don't know what to say. Well, the promise that we have is the Spirit of God that is indwelling us is already interceding for us. When I can't utter a word, when I can't even come to the point of crying out to God, the Spirit of God that indwells me is already interceding for me. And that's kind of the idea here. When I be still before God in the midst of whatever it is that I'm going through, it's an act of worship. Now, continuing on, we see that there's a duty to be still, that we're called to be still. And again, because of what? God's sovereignty in the situation. We can't react to a situation. We can't allow our emotions to take over. We can't be overwhelmed, even though that's part of our life, part of our experience. We have to try and, again, tame that in light of who God is and what God has done for us. So, again, be still as to words. Speaking against God's will. I mean, think about that. When things have transpired in your life and you've spoken against it, is it because we have forgotten that God is sovereign? And regardless of what the situation is, it's by his allowance that we're walking through it to begin with. And so to speak out against it, to cry out against it, to complain against it, in essence, is to go against the very will of God. In essence, we should even, again, and I'm not just speaking, high religion here saying, oh, just be faithful. I mean, let's get real. Things are hard that we go through. But how am I called to react to those things? First and foremost, remember, who is God? God is. Who's the one in control? God is. And how has he called me to live my life? He's called me to live my life for his glory. And again, that's what the psalmist wants us to understand here. There is a manner in which I am to live and respond and react to everything that goes on around me. And that is for the glory of God. And so that encompasses my complaining against anything that would be taking place. The other aspect of it is don't speak ignorantly without understanding or remembering what he's done or is doing. So again, if I just have a knee-jerk reaction to something and I just speak out against it, that's not taking the time to understand or taking the time to use wisdom and exercise wisdom and to seek godly counsel on things. That's just a knee-jerk reaction of my flesh. And in essence, when that takes place, I'm actually speaking out against God more than anything. Because if I understand his sovereignty, if I understand his power and authority, then I would have to understand and bring myself to a place where I submit humbly to him and say, okay, God, I know you're in control. You're not the author of evil, but I know evil exists in this world, and you allow evil to enter into our life and to affect us for your glory, because it, one, reminds me of the gospel and the fact that you're coming back for me and you're going to establish your kingdom that will be without sin. But for this short period of life that the book of James describes as a vapor, I am to wait patiently for that day, living and glorifying you and seeking out your will. So help me know how to respond. And I do that by exercising wisdom. Also, don't speak up with a puffed up sense of oneself. How dare this happen to me? I've done all this stuff. Why? That kind of idea. Because again, when we look at this idea and we look at it in the context of what the psalmist is saying, be still. When we're not still, what is it that we're doing? Well, ultimately, we're speaking out against the will of God. But this notion of this foundation of understanding he is my fortress, he is my comforter, he is my dwelling, he's my defender, he's my sovereign, all of these things, all of this understanding allows me to sit still and walk through whatever it is that I'm going through, and it allows me the ability to glorify the very God that I say that I love. So also to be still with actions, outward behavior, again, as opposed to God's will. If I'm being still, I'm not going to do something that might later be shown to not be the right thing to do, which would then again be what? Going against the will of God. If it's the will of God for me to walk through a valley, should I walk through the valley? What if I'm about to go through a valley and I do not know why I'm going through this valley? What if God came to me and said, hey, I'm going to have you walk through a hardship, but I'm not going to tell you why? Would that help us to walk through it anymore? No. We're called to glorify God based on his character and who he is and what he's done for us. We're not called to obey him and glorify him if things are good. Now, again, there's sometimes we walk through a valley or a hardship and we figure out, okay, hey, you know what? I walk through this because of this. And then there's times when we just throw our hands up and say, God, I don't know why I went through that. But here's the foundation. Ultimately, I know I went through it because of his will and because of his glory. And then we come to the final aspect of this notion of being still, and that is towards the inward of the heart issue here. And that is to cultivate a calm and quiet submission to God's will and pleasure and glory. So if we see all of this, my actions, my speech, and my heart, if I can take this foundation that the psalmist has formed and allow those three aspects of my life to conform and stand on that, think about your life. Think about when you go through these times of hardships and trouble. When they come upon you, your response, in essence, is a time of worship to the very Creator who's going to take care of us anyways. Things in my life don't happen because of me. Things in my life happen because of the grace and mercy of God. My ability to walk through hardships, my ability to even glorify God, come by the strength and the power that I receive through my salvation. And so when we take this concept of being still, this is what the psalmist is trying to get us to understand. Because God is who he is, this is how we respond. Because this way that we respond shows that we really believe this about our God. Because if we respond in any other manner than being still, it means that we may not really trust our God to be God. And that's the difference. Hey everybody, well, we're going to go ahead and pause the session here, and next session we'll pick up the knowing God aspect of the be still and know. So for right now, just contemplate what it means to be still before God with your circumstances, the things that you're going through in your life, and we'll pick up with the rest of it next time we meet. I hope you've been blessed. We'll catch you next time.